Hi, everyone, and welcome to the special Tramelcast of the Neil Haley Show, the Storehouse Media Group podcast, and Criminally Good with Jen and Sherrie. How are you guys? And let's kind of go right into it with introductions, Sherrie.
I will. I will. I am super excited to introduce and to bring on Doug Kari. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Sherrie.
He just looks like just this like regular guy just sitting there. But let me tell you, he has a background and he investigates true crime and missing person cases firsthand and in depth. So, but that's not all about Doug. Doug wasn't as an attorney as well, and he was in IP law, filing civil litigation, and now here you are, living your dream, your passion. What caused you to cross over from the civil litigation to investigating and writing true crime?
Well, Sherrie, I've always loved to write. I was an English major at Berkeley and kind of a frustrated novelist type, right? And so as time went on, of course, I did a lot of legal writing and that polished my research skills and my writing ability. A lot of trial writing, writing for courtroom work is telling a story about what happened in a case. And from that, I transitioned into doing some freelance journalism. And I really got drawn into the true crime genre. There's a lot of interest in it, and I was interested in it. I started getting positive reader feedback. And so one thing led to another. And now I'm almost 15 years in writing in the true crime genre, doing investigative journalism and all of that.
Pretty impressive there. I'm Jennifer. I don't know if we met at the very beginning or just very briefly. Doug, it's something that caught me, and I did law enforcement for 32 years. But what I wanted to say is I read something about you. It said that you were willing to lie inside of a grave or sleep at a crime scene to understand what happened. Now, that's funny enough on that, and I don't find that odd because I have a retired detective and my former undercover partner. Um, in the really tough homicide cases that he had to work, he did the same thing, and him and I have talked about it quite a bit. So what I'd like to know is that kind of immersion. What's that getting you that interviews and documents don't get you? What are you getting there?
I want to feel the vibe of the case, Jennifer. I want to get a sense for everything, for the law enforcement side, for the perpetrator side, the victims. A lot of what I do is work with victims' families because I want to honor the victims and understand the victims. But as to the perpetrator side, also, I don't want to turn them into a two-dimensional evil person. They may have done very evil things, but they're still a human being. They may not be a very good human being, and I want people to be held accountable, but I want to understand the why. And when it comes to locations, I want to feel for myself. I want to get a sense of the energy, just see the place. So, for example, on July 4th this year, instead of celebrating the 250th here at home, I jumped on a plane, flew down to Arkansas, and stayed in room 256 of the Hilton Garden Inn because that's where Aurora Phelps committed her first in a string of alleged crimes of drugging and robbing victims, which ultimately, per the FBI, led to the deaths of at least three people. So I thought, well, if I'm going to go down there and see where she lived and where she came from, might as well stay in the room where she committed her first alleged crime.
Oh wow, that's a a little eerie, but okay, that's good. Did you get anything from that? I mean, just looking out the windows there, or did they ask you why you wanted that particular room, or they didn't want to know?
I was a little cagey about that, Jennifer. I didn't want to get into the full explanation. I just said, I like this room and I'd really like to stay there. So they said, we'll hold it for you.
Well, there
So
you.
what I got out of it was just a real sense now. Now, when I hear the facts about what happened and how the first victim woke up on the floor, drugged and feeling terrible, then went back to sleep and woke up in the bathroom, partially clothed the next day with the hotel staff trying to get her out of there. I could picture exactly where that took place and understand that this was a really vicious alleged attack. It was something really bad. I could just picture this poor woman who thought that Aurora Phelps was her friend, but allegedly, and what she says Aurora did was to actually um, drug her and steal her purse and take her credit card and buy a plane ticket up to Las Vegas and spend thousands of dollars. So, yeah, it does give me a sense when I do that kind of thing, or when I lie in a grave and try to picture what took place there. It enables me to fully absorb as much as I can about the scene where the crime took place.
Like
So
it.
it's you are the kind, you're not just satisfied with the 60,000 foot view. You've got to be boots on ground and figure out the details. A lot of it's the why.
The boots on the ground part, Sherrie, is important for me. I want to go that extra mile. My commitment to my readers is that I will get as deep as I possibly can, and then I will give you as fair and complete a 360-degree view into what happened as I possibly can. Everything from the social media dynamics to the victim or victims, the perpetrator, the families that are involved, of course, law enforcement, what law enforcement did to solve the crime or try to solve the crime, or the missing person investigation, the nature of the place where it took, where the events occurred, all of that, everything that I can possibly bring to bear. That's what's most satisfying for me, and that's how I'm trying to contribute to the true crime genre, not just repackaging what other people have done, but trying to break new ground.
Well, your first book was the Berman murders, right? And
Correct.
yeah, yeah, and it got some really good reviews on it. It took 9 years to find the remains, right?
It took me years to investigate that case. The problem in that case, Sherrie, and it's very frustrating when you run into this, is there just was not a lot of available information. I had to develop witnesses. Some of them were reluctant to talk. It took me years, for example, to get a couple of family members of the alleged perpetrator to open up to me. At first, obviously, they didn't want to turn on another family member, or they were just resistive or didn't want to get involved. But over time, as they saw that I was really serious and committed to it, then they began to open up. And finding the location where the bodies turned up, the the notes of the law enforcement agency, the Inyo County Sheriff's Office, were based on a configuration of a dirt road as it used to exist prior to some heavy flash flooding that occurred years later. So I had to not only get them to turn over their files to me, but then I had to try to recreate the route that they actually took to get to the gravesite and account for the changes because of the flash flooding, and then just do a lot of on the ground looking. And it took me multiple times to finally find that location. But when I did, it was eerie. It was unchanged from the crime scene photos. It was just getting there that was so hard.
Well, walk us through that moment when that case connected to the Cambodian sex trafficking in the Marine.
So, Sherrie, I didn't start out wanting to talk about pedophilia and sex trafficking in Cambodia. That's not what called me to the case. My brand is to cover cases primarily in the deserts of the Southwest, California, Nevada, Arizona, for example. I went down and was boots on the ground in the Nancy Guthrie case. Other locations in the West that called me, stories that called me. This story called to me because it happened in a location that's very remote near Death Valley. And that location is near and dear to my heart. All three of my kids were baptized in a waterfall that comes off a desert mountain range out there, a very remote location. That's how near and dear to my heart this place is. And when I got into the story and wanted to understand what happened to these two hippie campers who are camping at this remote clothing optional hot springs in the middle of nowhere in this desert valley, they go on a hike one morning and never come back. What happened? But as I got into the case and identified an alleged perpetrator, I then started following his life. And that's what led me to the horrific crimes that he was convicted of perpetrating in Cambodia.
That's just crazy. You mentioned going to Arizona and the Nancy Guthrie case, and I know that Sherrie has been kind of keeping up and following that quite a bit. Um, and I haven't that much and all, but if you could maybe give us a little bit of, I'm assuming you've been out there to Catalina Foothills or
I
know
have.
that
I
area
was
pretty well.
I got around there. I went to that location. I went to other locations that were tied to the case and had a look around and was there both day and night because the crime allegedly took place sometime in the middle of the night. So I thought, well, I need to see what it looked like in the same kind of time of evening. And I tell you, it's dark out there. It's a dark sky community to begin with. And then that particular neighborhood is up in these foothills where there's actually fairly dense desert vegetation. And the HOA in these nice exclusive homes, they don't permit a lot of exterior lighting. So it keeps it very dark. It was quite eerie being there. I'll have to tell you, Jennifer, that was strange to be there in the nighttime.
I can imagine the desert night in the quiet. There's a whole lot that gives you that feeling that something different. And, every little noise, every little thing.
Well, there was a whole encampment of media that at that point, a few days had passed and the media scrum had begun. But what I did was I not only looked at the location and spent time there, but I also walked around in on other streets and in other areas to get a sense for what it would have been like before the media was there, when Nancy is apparently at home asleep in this home that she's lived in for many years, and some person or persons come in and apparently kidnap her. How terrifying that must have been. And also how relatively easy it would be for somebody to move around under the cover of darkness in a location like that. That place is wonderful for dark sky viewing. It's not so good for physical security.
How far is her actual residence from the actual southern border of the U.S. and Mexico?
So that's such a pertinent question, Jennifer. It's about 70 miles, 70 to 72 miles. And that was such an important fact for me because I felt strongly when I analyzed the video that came out of from the Ring doorbell camera of that shadowy looking figure with the mask on, the full balaclava on, and the gloves. I really took time when that first came out to take a close look at it. At that time, I believe the sheriff's office was saying that the perpetrator had on leather gloves. I took a close look at those and I was like, those aren't leather gloves. Those are black nitrile work gloves like I've seen at other workers in the neighborhood. In an upscale neighborhood like that, you see workers coming and going all the time. Many of them are Hispanic. That's very common in these kinds of areas, especially close to Mexico. Same thing here in Southern California. Most of them are honest, decent, hardworking people. But you take a big enough group of people, and you could have somebody that's an exception to the rule and that actually views an elderly person like that who's apparently wealthy. Maybe they've worked at her property and know that her daughter is someone famous. And in a criminal mind, that might be looked at as an opportunity.
I'm gonna switch a little bit. Your role in the Baby Emmanuel. Um, I, you picked up right away that Jake Harrow and Rebecca Harrow's their conversation with the media, with the press, wasn't legit. There were problems in what they were saying. You went out to a parking lot there to where they said what they this person knocking her out and taking the baby and all of that. You pretty much debunked her uh, within a minute.
Well, Jennifer, I think so many people on social media beat me to the punch. People saw that, and one thing I love about people in the true crime ecosystem, as I call it, they have a good sense of right and wrong. They crave justice and they can spot BS. And I think so many people, when they saw that interview by Rebecca Haro, where she was claiming that someone came up behind her and said "Hola" and hit her and stole the baby, their BS meter was going like this. And so I think I was just one of many people who looked at that and said, this doesn't make any sense. So yes, I went to the parking lot of the Big Five sporting goods store where this abduction, this kidnapping allegedly took place, which we now know it didn't. And then I surveyed the neighborhood looking for different security cameras in the area of the Big Five. And I also went to the location where she had apparently, she being Rebecca Haro, had taken another one of their kids to a game and then had supposedly had gone down to the Big Five. And I spent time, of course, at the property where they lived. I was there quite a bit, interviewing neighbors and just taking a close look.
One more question in here, and then we'll pass it back off to Sherrie. But you also did the research back on Jake Haro and his 2018 incident with the child abuse with a 10-month-old that is permanently disabled because of the abuse, physically.
So, yeah, I did pull up the forensic records. That's something I like to do, is get deep into the records of a case. Sometimes you can get them online. Sometimes you have to go to the courthouse or send someone to the courthouse on your behalf. Sometimes, well, it's happened to me only once, but I'm betting it'll happen again. Sometimes you actually have to file a lawsuit to get the records. Sometimes even a Public Records Act request or a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. Sometimes agencies won't turn over something that you believe under the law they should. And if you're going to be vigorous about it, you've got to go to court to protect your rights and get those records. So in this case, though, I was able to get the records relatively easily, and I read them closely. And it was one of the most horrible things I'd ever read, what he did to this, to baby Carolina, I believe her name is, in 2018. It was just awful. And then understanding what happened in this incident, it wasn't a stretch to say, I think this guy has a problem. I think he did the same thing to the baby that he did back then, and just very troubling.
Yeah, it's sick.
Awful.
Jake is definitely a predator, but Rebecca was helping him. And,
well, it'll be interesting to see, Jennifer, if she changes her story. She has stuck to that story pretty hard about how it was a kidnapping and that she was hit on the head and that whole story that she told. But of course, now that Jake essentially confessed, although the details aren't public, but at least he pleaded guilty to the crime and stood up and took his sentence. Now that's going to put pressure on her to align, I think, with what he's done. It's going to be pretty hard to go to court and say, stick to this kidnapping story. I mean, it was pretty easily debunked by law enforcement. There's video cameras in the neighborhood. Although there's nothing right there in that Big Five parking lot, there's lots of ways that law enforcement can trace her movements and figure out what happened. So I think if I had to predict, if the case goes to trial, she'll claim that she was somehow under his spell. She was scared of him. She was being manipulated. She didn't have agency. This wasn't really her doing. But more likely, again, if I was going to predict, I'd predict some kind of a plea deal.
I can see a plea deal coming.
Yeah, I think your instinct's right, Jennifer.
Well, Doug, given your track record with all these cold cases that you're working on, do you think there's a case that you may be working on now that's quietly building toward a break?
Well, the Aurora Phelps case is one I've really dug into. I just last week published my third article in a series that I've written for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. And that was the case where I went down to Arkansas to understand where Aurora was from prior to the time that she lived in Mexico, where she was from, where she lived with her husband, where her first crime of drugging and robbing somebody allegedly occurred. And I'm following that case closely, trying to get as much information as I can out of Mexico. She's currently in custody down there. It's very opaque. It's difficult to know what goes on in the Mexican legal system, especially from up here. It's not as transparent a system as we have here, but from what I understand, and again, this is just an understanding, I can't bank on it, but from what I understand, there are additional proceedings involving her taking place in Mexico. And what will likely happen is once those Mexican proceedings are all wrapped up, she will then be extradited to the United States to face charges in Las Vegas. When that happens, I will be very much on that case. I'm going to be following it closely, and I'm continuing to follow it closely and try to find information. That's another one, though, Sherrie, where getting information is tough. I'm having to really dig for every little piece that I get. There are people involved who just don't want to talk. By involved, I don't mean involved in the crimes, but simply either a victim, somebody that knew Aurora, whatever, who just have clammed up. Maybe they don't want to be involved. This is one that, although it's not as high profile, if she comes back to the U.S. and goes on trial, my prediction is it's going to be a press case for sure. How often do you have a pretty young, charming woman seducing older men, drugging them allegedly, and then to the point where she's even crossing the border in a wheelchair with one of the guys, and some of them are turning up dead. One of them allegedly by the side of the road, another one in a hotel room down in Mexico. I mean, that's some serious stuff. And it's the kind of fact pattern that I think true crime people will be interested in. What I'm interested in is, how did this come about? How did she go from being someone who I understand was quite charming, upbeat? She was a wonderful singer. She had a great voice. She loved to sing on stage, dreamed of maybe being a star. How do you go from that to being somebody who's allegedly so ruthless, crazy? And I want to understand that if I can get in there and dig. I want to understand what happened. My last article in the series, I touched on it a little bit, some of the things that might have spurred her to do this: financial trouble, marital problems, a custody case that didn't go her way with her kids. Maybe she just became angry and embittered and thought, screw it. I'm just going to do what I want to do and kind of get back at the world. I don't know. That's part of the mystery of these kinds of cases.
I've met a couple of ruthless females out there that, you didn't think so. You think, well, they have this nice home, they have, great kids, everything seems to be going pretty good here for them. They're not in poverty by any means. They're relatively got a good education. And then you start to finding out just what level they're willing to go to, who they're willing to kill, who they're willing to steal from. You start to finding out how much they're willing to manipulate and how long they've done that. And it sounds like you're digging into someone who's like that.
I am, and I think, Jennifer, there's usually a pathology involved as well. I don't think it's just environmental. I think that people may have a genetic predisposition, something that makes them on the scale of normal to sociopathic to psychopathy. They may fall somewhere in the sociopathic, psychopathic personality type. That's not to excuse anybody's behavior. There are plenty of people who have those tendencies who are productive members of society, and they learn to control their urges. I'm a big believer in personal accountability, but I do like to understand if there's early evidence of that, if there's things in their past. I haven't uncovered anything like that yet for Aurora. And as you know, it's unusual for women to be the ones that surface in this kind of situation. Most intimate partner violence is committed by men. The fact patterns are horrible. Sometimes it makes me think, my gosh, what is it with us men? Why do men do these horrible things to women that they're intimate with? Is it testosterone? Is it some combination of their upbringing? Why do men do these things? And I hate seeing it, but I think that's part of what makes it fascinating, Jennifer, when you see a woman as an alleged perpetrator. Well, okay, we get that historically men have been the one that commit a lot of these types of crimes. But to see a young, pretty, petite, charming woman do it, it goes against the grain of what we've come to expect.
Yeah. And you know what, Doug? It's, I feel maybe women get away with it and they never will find out
That's
something. That's my take. And Doug, where do you see yourself? You're so knowledgeable. Absolutely. I'm been absolutely impressed by this interview. Where do you see yourself in this whole crime uh, investigation thing, where you're going with it?
well, I a couple of places, Neil, and thank you for asking that. I do have a second book coming out in February. The publisher is Bloomsbury, same as my first book. Well, technically, Roman and Littlefield was the publisher on the first book. They're a very respected publisher, and they were acquired by Bloomsbury. Bloomsbury came to fame because they did the Harry Potter series, and they've been very supportive of my work. And I'm excited about my second book. It's called Taking Naomi, and it's a story of an abduction, a wonderful 18-year-old woman who was abducted by a perpetrator at random from a Walmart parking lot in Fernley, Nevada. And how it was that this perpetrator in midlife came to do this, and then how it was that law enforcement in this rural area so quickly solved the crime is the gist of the story. The subtitle of the book is A Sociopath's Midlife Crisis Leads to Murder. And that was my conclusion. Other things I'm doing, of course, I'm continuing to do newspaper writing. That's not as vigorous an outlet as it used to be. I just don't have that many available outlets to write for. I do some writing for the Long Beach Post, done some writing for LA Weekly, the Annual Register, a small paper, and then, of course, the Las Vegas Review Journal. But as newspaper readership shrinks, it's harder for me to get a voice through that kind of writing. Somebody suggested I do Substack. I might look into that. Meanwhile, I do have my own website, dougkari.com. I am getting involved more on the documentary side. I'm not a starstruck kind of guy, but I do find that having a voice on camera can be helpful to establishing my brand, that I may be able to add color or perspective. So I've done a lot of podcast appearances. I've had a couple of filmed appearances now for documentaries. I see more of that coming up. I just want to be a good voice for this genre and somebody who can comment meaningfully and add value for people who are interested in the subject matter. So that's my goal. Yeah.
You absolutely can. That's for sure. You're a wealth of knowledge, and there's the new mediums that are out there. You might never know. And that's, you look at certain things. So we'll definitely talk off air about that. But go ahead, Sherrie, with final questions, and Jennifer for Doug.
Well, I think you answered. I was like, what's next? And you told us that. That's so the way they can get a hold of you is through your websites.
DougKari.com. DougKari.com. We got it written right here, folks, and that's it. He's got it simple, and that's the right way to do it. So you guys check it out. He's got a lot of other stories. We didn't get deep into it.
I mean, that's the thing. He has lots of stories, and these are where he's doing the investigation.
Yeah.
He's digging and finding these specific things. He's not just telling someone else's story, which a lot of creators do today. They tell other people's stories that they uncovered and then make it their own. Doug is doing it himself, and he has to be commended. He's one of those last journalists out there with integrity in that way.
He's getting out there in the desert. He's walking those places. He's going day and night. Just, I've read it, and now he's telling us about it. I mean, and like we started out this thing, he actually got down into a grave that had been dug for a person out in the desert. See that perspective from every viewpoint there. he's reporting that. He's putting that out there. I know he did some work on the Travis Decker case as well, on Melody Bizard. So you've been investigating some very interesting cases. Me being on the far East Coast down here in Georgia, I'm not hearing about all of the ones that are out there on the West Coast, just like you're not hearing about all of them here. But yeah, I appreciate the kind of work you're doing, and I like the way you are doing it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And maybe you're making me blush, but maybe y'all could say something to my wife so she knows that she supports me. In all seriousness, Jane has been such a supporter of mine, because it's not easy sometimes being married to me. The prime example being when I drove out from Las Vegas to Southern California. I'd been here for a couple of hours. I got a phone call and I said to Jane, I'm going to Mexico. I'm going to help Hannah Kobayashi come back home. And she's like, what? What? Sorry, what? And I explained, yeah, I'm leaving right now. I'm going to Mexico. I explained the situation. And she was like, is this safe? And I said,
so you have so many stories, Doug. That's for sure. I wish we had more time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So go to DougKari.com, go to StorehouseMediaGroup.com for all things publishing, podcasting, media, and more. And Jennifer Clarke Eskew to pick up her book. Appreciate it, guys. That was the special Tramelcast of the Neil Haley Show, the Storehouse Media Group podcast, and Criminally Good